McLean. Dick Coach's Corner.
You're listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast with your host, Andy Plymer,
For someone to explain.
bringing you up-to-date coaching concepts from the world of rugby,
Between these mandatory
sharing ideas to make the game better.
Okay, welcome to episode number 31 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Andy Plymer, and joining me today is John Lavery. John is the Canada U19 forwards coach and has had numerous roles in both men's and women's rugby, whether it be high school or university and senior club, or age grade national and senior women. Lav's made some great contributions to the game over the past 10 years. We've coached a bunch together in that time as well, and he's a good mate of mine, so it's awesome to have him on the show. So welcome, Lav.
All right, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries, man. So let us know what's happened over the last kind of 10 years and coaching experience, and what's kind of kept driving you doing what you're doing.
I think what a lot of guys that coach around where we are, it's kind of like you just enjoy that build process, most guys that start in the club scene here, you kind of get roped into it because no one else wanted to do it.
Yep.
And you just kind of like learn to love it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So started with St. Anne's because there was no other coach around, and then when someone took over the job, they just kind of stuck me with the forwards coaching gig, and no one else really wanted to do it. And I've always kind of had a pretty inexperienced crew of players to work with.
Yeah.
And so you kind of get to do your own thing in that context, and you get to make lots of mistakes, and you learn a lot.
Yeah.
And I've been really lucky. Like, I've been working with and for guys that, they let me stay in my comfort zone when it was appropriate. And just let me do what I was strong at, and they kind of took care of the rest.
Yeah.
And then, I've got the opportunity in the last couple of years to work with some guys that don't let you do that, like Andy LaRue and Matt Stevens and yourself, where like you kind of have to have input with everything, you know what I mean? And you kind of push your knowledge of the game and put your expertise in context, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So, like, how have you, like, you've been head coach, you've been forwards coach, you've been, even skills coach at times. What do you feel is where do you enjoy your coaching the most?
I think that's the other beautiful thing about the experience I've had the last few years is you get to learn and you get to love the challenge of understanding all aspects of it. Because any piece of the game that you're learning it only really exists in the context of the whole sport.
Mm.
So what I've kind of taken away is that, I'm a scrum coach pretty much like by trade, but when you get exposed to stuff like different philosophies of defense, it's super stimulating, and you just come away with more questions than answers. And so you kind of start breaking it down yourself and just learning to enjoy like the fact that you don't really know anything. You're kind of like embracing that challenge and just trying to do what you're doing better all the time in your own context.
Yeah, exactly. And what you know now may not mean anything in a couple of years' time either. It's gonna be irrelevant almost.
That wouldn't it? You know what I mean? Like 5 years ago, the hit was king.
Yeah.
And then the rugby gods took that out of the game, and so scrum coaches around the world were at a pretty rapid scramble to find
to work out how to coach wrestling.
Yeah, So the game changes as fast as anything else. It's unbelievable.
So you've you touched on there that you're a scrum coach. That's your priority first, and then everything kind of fits in around that. When you're doing a lot of age grade stuff, a lot of listeners are probably doing similar like U18 kind of age group. When you've got a young group of guys or a young group of girls, and it's your first session with them, and it's a scrum session, what's that kind of look like?
I think the most important thing for that kind of stuff with young players. Same as anything else in the game. It's got to be really fun. And it's got to be engaging. So we start with a lot of fun combatives and stuff, and just get kids like kind of tuned in. And then the next kind of piece would be doing some activation exercises for the stabilization muscles, like particularly around the spine. So, like just so I don't forget stuff in the warm up process, I kind of just start head down. Start at the top, work with the neck, then the upper back, then the core, then do some leg stuff. And then we break into body position work, because I think one of the challenges is nothing really works right if you don't get the body position first. And if you don't do that activation stuff first, they're not able to maintain a neutral spine and a good pushing position, which is really the key of any scrum. Because if you don't have a good spine position, everything isn't in line. Any force you generate kind of goes wherever the head's pointing, and if it's not pointing in the right direction, you're not really getting what you want out of it.
So what's some of the things you might do with those activation stuff, like some wrestling kind of type moves? And
well, we kind of break it down even lower than that. So we do a lot of static holds.
Yeah.
So
isometric strength, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. So it's the isometric stuff from the head down to the waist is pretty much the foundation of your ability to transmit force. And it's a step that a lot of people will skip just because of time. But I think it's pretty vital. And another key for me is that I have to understand that you're never going to fix or develop a really powerful scrum in a single session. It's really a process of a season where you start with that foundational work, and then you build from there, but you can only really go as far as where the athletes are at.
Yeah, so that kind of leads me to my next question. Like, once you've had that first session, and every team's going to be different, every group of athletes going to be different. Where do you go from there? Like, are you slowly building into kind of like a one-on-one scrummaging, two-on-one scrummaging, three-on-one kind of stuff, and then like where what's it look like from there?
So those initial sessions are always going to finish with a little bit of one-on-one or 1v2 scrummaging. I like to do the 1v2 where you have two players resisting and 60-70% intensity against one pusher. Pusher's challenge is to maintain good body position and good push technique. Which is really it's like sinking chest to the ground, extending through off both feet, and then just claiming the ground forward with short choppy steps. But then where that builds to is I like to focus on the linear bind first. So developing connection between the person who's actually engaged in the combat in the front row and the player immediately behind them. And I've stolen some terminology that I've actually found pretty effective is developing the philosophy of we're all consenting adults. And that we recognize when you're scrummaging that it is only semi-competitive, and the two players resisting, a pusher and a tandem, like a player behind, that they're really just working to help the two players that are in the pushing roles develop their skills. So they're only resisting at that level, and so they build a bit of confidence. And when they're confident, then they can develop aggression. Whereas if it's just kind of testosterone can take over, and you get guys kind of going at each other like a couple of bulls in the pen, and no one's really learning. So if we can dial that back and get that right first, you can build the intensity over a few weeks where guys can really have a go at each other, and it's still going to be productive. But it can't start at that level of intensity. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, awesome. Okay, and then so once you've built that scrum up, you're into kind of coaching mode now during games, and from game to game to game. How do you go about making adjustments during games at halftime, or even evaluating a session, a performance, and then adapting that to the next session?
Well, the beautiful thing about the way the scrum is now in terms of the laws of the game and the set as opposed to the hit, is that the body position becomes such a critical element of the game, and it's much easier to teach when you don't have to manage that hit. So a guy that's under pressure, he's really going to want to he's only going to be able to take away one thing, right? And he's going to latch onto that one thing. And usually the guy that we'd be talking about would be the tight head, who's probably arguably under the most pressure of anybody in the scrum. It's a pretty good barometer for where your scrum is at and how it's going. Is if the tight head's able to maintain a square position and you're able to generate quality ball. So a guy that needs to focus on one thing from you, you're going to give him a couple of key things you talked about at practice, but 9 times out of 10, you're not going to fix that in the game context. Well, I experienced a huge amount of success with that. Well, it would be a thing where you get him through that game and just kind of keep his confidence up as much as you can. But when you come away to Tuesday after a tough one, we might isolate that one area of the scrum that was giving us a bit of trouble. Like whether, and really, if you wanted to break it down, it would be like into the setup. Either it was on the set or it was on the feet of the ball where something broke down. And our key is, and again, like most guys that are going to be listening to this cast, like you get, maybe one scrum session a week if you're lucky, and it's 20 minutes. So you got to be really efficient with your time.
If your head coaches are back, you're maybe not even getting that.
Exactly. So you got to use like opportunities like in the cool down or pre-session or after sessions, to find that first domino where things went wrong. Because what's going to happen is a guy that's under pressure is going to like dip in confidence, and it's just going to carry over to the rest of the game. He's not going to play well. He's not going to enjoy his rugby. So what we got to do is find that first thing that went wrong, and we got to concentrate on that and help him get it right or her get it right. And once you've got that, you can kind of build from there. Like as long as the athlete's got a clear sense of what they need to do differently or what they need to do better, and they have opportunities to do it. And the more real-time feedback they can get through either like just the success of executing reps or the use of regular video, that's empowering. That on its own will keep a guy feeling like he's getting better, and he'll have clear evidence and like key indicators that he's getting better. And that confidence carries over into like the challenge of like going into the next game where, if you're playing any standard, any quality, like every game is tough. And so you got to really feel like you're in control of your own fate.
So in that, like what I'm getting out of that is like the importance of a common language is right up there, right? Like those 3 areas of the scrum that you were talking about earlier. That if you have those key pointers that you can just drip feed to them and then recall them, that's got to be pretty key.
Exactly. I mean, like most guys that work in the forwards, they'll tell you that whatever you're doing, as long as everyone has a common understanding of what you're trying to achieve and how you're trying to achieve it, you can't go too far wrong. I mean, there's 3 or 4 pretty common scrum setup and set methods that are going around in the professional game. They are significantly different one to another, and none of them is right or none of them is wrong. And I think that's a common area of agreement. There's like they're just a little bit different. So it's just making sure that your guys have a consistent set of guidelines for how they go about doing what they're doing. So their setup process, their engagement process, and how they're delivering the ball to the rest of the team at the conclusion of the scrum, so that we have a high success rate of getting the ball in and getting the ball out in the way that we want it to.
Okay, so you're currently the U19 scrum coach for Canada. Last year you were the U18 scrum coach for Canada, and that's rolled into your current role. You toured Ireland last year. What were some of the experiences there, especially like in terms of the scrum, going up against the three main provincial Irish academies, and how'd the boys perform, and what did you learn as a coach from those experiences?
I felt the boys actually matched up extremely well physically. The players in that particular group, there's some pretty big, strong units, and they really enjoy the physical challenge.
Yeah,
I think they were even a bit surprised with how well they matched up against their Irish counterparts. Like their first game against Munster was a big test. but we got on top of them early, and I think that at times it was even a bit frustrating because we were kind of told in no uncertain terms that like you're not going to be rewarded for scrum dominance in under 18s rugby. So you might as well just give it up. But the boys didn't.
Yeah, awesome.
But I think that what the kids took out of that was that they can go toe to toe with anybody, and they don't really have to worry about that as long as they go as eight, and they take that confidence from good preparation. If they are prepared, they're going to be successful.
That psychological piece is massive, right?
It was huge, and having a back five that were genuinely engaged. You know what I mean? Like you don't always find back rows that love to scrum, but the back five in that group just loved to dominate at whatever they did. You know what I mean? If they were playing ping pong, that would get pretty competitive. Like darts is competitive. Everything they did. And so those guys want to contribute. They want to win. They want to compete as best they can. And if you have a strong back five and a committed back five and guys that really genuinely love to scrummage, like I said, like if you make it fun, if you make it engaging, it only makes it better. You know what I mean? If it's enjoyable, you do it better. So it's like any other part of the sport.
All right, so moving on to coaches out there in clubland and school land and kind of stuff like that, who it might be a one-person show. What would your advice be to those coaches who they have to coach the scrum, but it's not really an area of their expertise?
I think the most important thing, and probably the first thing you'd like for someone in that situation to do, is develop a little bit of like empathy for the job. So just try practicing it a bit.
Yeah.
Like watch some of those videos. I mean, there's a ton of good content on YouTube.
Yeah.
Some of it you can even do solo, where you can just do some individual body position work and stuff, and sort of get a sense of what that feels like and what the demands are. And then just kind of understand that there really are no dark arts. Like I hate that term, and I mean, sure, there's small things you can do and stuff, but at the end of the day, like if your body position isn't right first, nothing else even really matters. So if you're working with young players or you haven't done it a whole lot yourself, really the key is just if you get that right, you can't go too far wrong. The next thing is to use players' expertise. I mean, guys that have done it a lot have a fair bank of experience, and by and large, I mean, they don't even know what they know until they start telling you about it. And Lord knows, props love to talk about scrummaging. So, like the more questions you ask, the better the nuggets you're gonna get out of them are.
Yeah.
So you can kind of pass those on yourself.
Yeah, and that's pretty empowering to the players as well. Like it leads down that athlete-centered coaching kind of route as well.
Exactly, and the other small thing would be, just try to work it from like a problem-solving perspective. Like, what are you trying to achieve in this particular scrum? So what is inhibiting you from achieving that outcome? And then you kind of work backwards from there and try to find some solutions that are gonna like lead you to that place. Yeah, like stuff like what you the Canadian senior men at the Rugby World Cup. They took a tool out of the old school toolbox, and they used a channel one ball where they had the eight binding between the four and the open side flanker. So the ball is in and out super super quick. I mean, it's a quick fix, simple solution to a complex problem of teams having gargantuan loose heads, and we don't have a huge number of guys that have a lot of tight head experience or like that kind of like quality that can handle those opponents. You can kind of like extrapolate from that particular scenario to 1,000 things that you would meet in a regular like club environment. We just got to problem solve,
Yeah, and involve the players in it for sure. All right, so the eternal debate in the scrum world, live scrummaging versus just smashing into a machine. Where do you stand on that one?
So I would rarely use a machine, and in my context, where like again you have that one or two scrum sessions a week, when you're lucky.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the best use of your time.
Yeah.
And I've rarely been in an environment where it was. Um, and I haven't found that it's like when I've worked in a couple of international contexts, like in Ireland, we didn't touch one,
Yeah.
and we had loads of time, and there was one there all the time. And when I was in England with the senior women, that actually kind of worried me and stuff, where we didn't have a huge playing group on that tour,
Mm-hmm.
so didn't get a lot of opportunities to go like full Monty with that group.
Yeah.
But 90% of our work, I would say, would have revolved around that body position work first, linear bind second, lateral bind third, and then the collective. I think before our first test, we only had 3 genuinely live reps, and then it was cold out, so we just got the girls back inside, and they went just fine. So I really, really strongly feel that the machine. I mean, I'm sure it's got its place and stuff, but in, in, in a in a typical club environment, how much value you get out of it versus developing body awareness when you have multi-directional forces and stuff and you have to support your own body weight. That's probably a better use of your time, and I think it's probably going to be a more enjoyable experience for the players because they get to genuinely compete against someone else.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, a bit more dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the equivalent of throwing a rugby ball at a tire. You know what I mean? It's not the same thing as throwing a pass, is it?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, get your scrum half doing that for 30 minutes. It'd be awesome.
I'm not,
That'll transfer nicely.
and I'm sure he's going to say thank you. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so outside of scrummaging, what's your favorite area of the game to coach? I'm sure that's pretty that changes regularly, but right now, what's your favorite area of the game to coach outside of the scrum?
So one of the areas of the game where again, like you kind of get exposed to some new stuff, and like working with Andrew Monroe with the 18s last year and with the senior women, they're trying to implement line speed defense, which is much more aggressive and puts a lot more pressure on defenders to take width.
Yeah.
And kind of own channels in defense and really focus on the ball as opposed to like really focusing on the shape of what the attack is trying to do.
Yeah.
That's been absolutely fascinating. Like, you know, I in my experience, I mean, like I've only really had to play in like an inside shoulder, like push defense and stuff. And just working from a completely different standpoint, like a totally different point of departure with what your main roles and concerns are as a player in the defensive line. That it's been really fun. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just like a new logic puzzle where you break it down to the essential bits and parts, where you're not working with side on collisions so much, more front on. And just that learning process has been like super enjoyable.
Yeah, I think there's some great stuff out there. Like just watching today's games, Wales, Australia, All Blacks Ireland, just the variations in defence. Like it's just another aspect of the game. I think naturally we tend to gravitate towards attack because it's exciting and that's where the rugby ball is. So that's kind of where you tend to be drawn to. But there's a whole another game being played in defence, and there's some great stuff out there right now.
Exactly, and I never really spent a whole lot of time thinking about it. Like it's kind of get up and smash them. You're a prop. That's that's what my kind of scope of experience was.
Yeah,
and then working with some pretty like creatively inclined people. They're just trying to look at things in a different way and kind of push the boundaries of what's possible. I mean, that's just a lot of fun to be around.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. All right, cool. Well, when you're coaching a session, what's if someone was to come along and watch a session that you coach, what's some of the things they're gonna see and hear during something that you run?
Well, I think typically I'm a pretty up tempo kind of a guy. I got a lot of energy, so I try to sort of let that sort of drive my ship, because I try to make it as enjoyable as possibly can for the players. Lots of touches of the ball, very game heavy. Usually try not to bite off too much in one go. Kind of try to isolate an element of a skill that we're trying to correct or develop, and kind of really, really target that and get that one thing right. So like in the context of the scrum, that might be just like a really fun kind of like combative game, sort of like warm up and stuff. Then we'd start with some individual work, but then we'd like you got to get right down to the brass tacks because if the head coach only gave you 20 minutes, that's all you got.
Mm.
So we might work through our setup process and kind of like build in terms of how much resistance our attacking or defending scrum, whichever we're targeting that particular session, would be how much resistance they'd be facing. So just start at like 50%, let the players get confident and comfortable, and then kind of just gradually turn up the heat in the frying pan and see what shakes loose.
Cool.
Like try to use a lot of like real time video feedback, like no fancy apps or anything, but like just either use my phone or an iPad or something like that. So like give them a quick look at it, let them have a go, repeat that process until the time's up.
Mm. Yeah, sweet. All right, awesome. And last one before we wrap it up. Like coaches out there who are looking for some scrummaging resources, what are some of the ones that you kind of rely on or you call on that you think are pretty spot on and reliable?
It's a couple of things. So the Mike Cron body position and body awareness stuff, like the activation material that they put online, the New Zealand Rugby Union made a the coach's toolbox that I don't think you can access it from outside New Zealand anymore, but it's all on YouTube now, anyways. But all of that stuff is absolute gold. Guys find it engaging, it's fun, and the language used in it seems to be super clear. And clarity in communication when you're talking about combat is a big deal when people's safety's on the line.
Yeah.
So I found that super useful. Less about communication, more about body position. But the Argentina Rugby Union also have a lot of resources on YouTube that are pretty good. Again, they're very different.
Yeah. Well, they kind of know what they're doing too in the scrum.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of people, it's just like a lot of like chop and change. Like these people are trying this. Let's have a go at it. See what's going on. And the last piece would be there's a lot of good stuff out there on YouTube, but just as a caveat, if the body position of the players in the footage isn't right, I'd say the content probably isn't very good.
Mm.
A good barometer of what's safe and what's good is if everybody in that video clip looks like they're in a safe body position, that's probably sound.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's a lot of material out there where you see a lot of kind of folded up body positions and a lot of flex necks, and if that's not being corrected, I'd say just kind of buyer beware.
Yeah. Move on.
Yeah.
All right.
But just watching a lot of rugby, man, like just watching successful scrums, like is it that's leading this team to have a high completion rate? Why are they able to deliver the ball so well? Because like I said, there's teams out there using different methods and stuff, and you can take a lot from just watching how teams do stuff. If you wanted to, like a good contrast is like in New Zealand, they had 2 or 3 methods going on at the same time in different Super 15 franchises.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, they just picked the best one or the one that had the highest completion rate, and that's what the All Blacks ran with.
Sweet. That's pretty pragmatic.
It is,
Yeah.
and in terms of like major change, Munster in the last 3 years have been actually been pretty average at scrum time, but in the last 12 months seem to have made some small adjustments, and they're getting great quality ball and they're quite dominant. And they just having a look at what they were doing before and having a look at what they're doing now and seeing what those differences are for yourself. There's value in that, and you learn an awful lot.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. All right. Well, we always end the show with the same final 4 questions. When you were a kid growing up in Canada, who was kind of your first rugby player that you thought was pretty special and someone that you looked up to and admired?
Well, there was some front rowers going around back then. Because actually, believe it or not, there used to be way more rugby on TV back then.
That's amazing.
It would be on TSN and stuff.
Yeah.
So there was Laurent Benezet from France, who's a loosehead prop.
Yeah.
It's like way ahead of his times. Really, really dynamic. Typical French player. Lots of flair. Lots of popping up around the loose. getting stuff done. And then obviously the All Blacks front row of that '95 team with Olo Brown and Craig Dowd were pretty impressive. That was really my first exposure to rugby, was that World Cup.
Yeah, right.
A pretty special time to be watching rugby for the first time.
Yeah, for sure.
And in the Canadian context, the big three would be like Al Sharon.
Of course.
Like, I remember reading in the paper about how he scored the winning try in Cardiff the first season I was like ever playing the game. Gareth Rees was an absolute legend in his time.
Yeah.
They had a test in Vermont.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So we all went down there. I was like all like 19 or 20, and he took a ball off a lineout and just didn't even look like passing the ball and just ran clear over the American 10 and like scampered for a 50-yard touchdown. It was just bananas. And of course, Rod Snow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Big hero growing up and watching him play, and then I had the misfortune of having to play against him an awful lot.
Yeah, for sure. I played in that game too, and I just got to see him when he hung out on the wing. You got the scrummage against him, so it was our experiences were slightly different, I think.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah, cool. All right, and what about now? Who's some of your favourite players going around now?
It's a good time to just be a fan of the game, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. Yeah.
Lots of guys out there doing some really, really good stuff, having arguments with people about Dane Coles. Like, is that guy the best player in world rugby right now? I don't know.
He's got to be close.
He's not far off.
Yeah.
He's not there.
Yeah.
And I mean, just like every test match has entertainment value nowadays. So it's really tough to single anybody out.
Yeah. Okay, and what about coaches? Who's a high profile coach that you look up to and like what they're doing?
I'll tell you, listening to Ronan O'Gara over the last year or two, since he's jumped on with Racing. I mean, the guys had to coach Johnny Sexton and then Dan Carter, like the guy who basically usurped his job, and then the best 10 in the world. Like, you got to be thinking like, oh man, I can't win for losing here.
Yeah.
But he's just got a tremendous amount of humility, and just the way he talks about, like learning it as a trade, as opposed to like just kind of trading on his reputation as a player.
Yeah.
And you got to really admire that. There's a certain level of humility in the way that he talks about what his role is now that you just don't hear all that much.
No.
Like, it's pretty cool.
No, I agree. Yeah. I've mentioned the podcast often here, Off the Ball, the Irish rugby podcast. You hear him come on every now and then. I totally agree. Yeah, it's total humility and, not resting on his laurels and constantly learning. It's pretty sweet.
That's impressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. All right, and final question before we wrap it up: who's a local coach around your area that you feel deserves a shout out for the work they're doing?
Well, I gotta say that Martial Laguin and Kevin Quinu, what they did with the Quebec senior women this summer was pretty special.
Yeah.
In the CRCs, without a lot of their big guns in the mix, and just did a really good job of developing some of those young girls and kind of helped them get to a really good place. And that tournament was tough. I mean, they lost their first game against BC, and but managed to like claw back and then beat a pretty star-studded Ontario team and a pretty gigantic Wolfpack team. Get it done. And I'm a pretty big fan of builders, as you and I kind of can sympathize with what they do and what they go through. Corey Hector out in Guelph, started his own club, and now it's quite successful, and he's a head coach of a very successful university program at the University of Guelph.
Yeah, for sure.
And then our boy Johnny Weller over at University of Western Ontario,
our former manager.
Yeah, definitely making a name for himself in the coaching world out there, doing some good stuff.
Got coach of the year, I think, for university.
Well, big shoes to fill. I mean, like Natasha Wesh is a coaching legend in that part of the world, and stepping in to sort of fill her role, and having to kind of put his own stamp on it, and working with some really quality people. Like I think he's working with Tom Dozell and Derek Daypuck out there, and
one of the Pletch boys as well, I think, too.
Yeah. I think that's a challenging environment for someone who hasn't worked a huge amount with in that environment before.
Yeah.
So I mean, good for him.
Yeah, absolutely, totally agree. And apart from his country of origin, total respect for him.
Absolutely.
That's just an inside joke that only Weller will be able to get, and no other listeners will understand. All right, okay, mate. Well, it's been good to catch up, and glad to finally get you on the show. And thanks for taking some time out of your Saturday night to come and have a chat.
Absolutely, this has been a blast.
Yeah, awesome. All right, mate. We'll catch you later.
All right, cheers.
All right, cheers, lads.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review via iTunes and keep listening for the next episode. You can also follow us on Twitter at RugbyCoachSCNR or via the website at therugbycoachescorner.com. Until next time, keep sharing ideas to make the game better.